Okay, so fortunately enough, this recipe is actually a very simple one. There is quite a few ingredients, but by and large it's reasonably cheap to make and is somewhat healthy as well. Now, I'm not going to be making rice for this recipe as I don't really have the time constraints right now in order to make solidly good rice. Instead, I'm just going to be having mine with some prepackaged like microwavable brown rice. But onto the ingredients. First off, we've got an onion here. You'll only need about one, either white or brown, reasonably large. Medium will do also. Then you've got 2 yellow peppers, again preferably large. If medium, that's fine. And about 3 or 4 chili peppers. Don't have to be too hot because this isn't that much of a spicy recipe for chili con carne, but it does help if they've got a bit of fire to them. Then tomato puree, as you can see here. Again, doesn't have to be the highest quality, but if you can get decent enough quality, that's always welcome. Then on top of that, between 500 and 600 grams of red kidney beans. Usually get 2 tins of about 400 grams. So you can use anywhere really, I'd say between 500 to 800 grams of red kidney beans. Then a tin of chopped tomatoes, some curry powder or smoked paprika if you have some around, a small amount of desiccated chili flakes, crushed preferably, I'd say, a nice bit of salt here, as you can see. Doesn't matter if it's table salt or cooking salt, either one is really fine. Then the herbs, flat leaf parsley, and a nice bit of coriander. I may also be using a small bit of garlic in this recipe, but that is entirely optional. Of course, then there's the olive oil. I know you're probably thinking, why is this in a Sprite bottle? Well, I got it from Greece and it came in that anyway, so don't be too freaked out. There's no Sprite involved in this recipe. Then, of course, the creme de la creme, and the main masterpiece of this recipe is the beef mince. If you want to get lamb, that's totally fine, but this recipe does generally tend to work best with beef mince. I have also made it with vegetarian mince before, and that works generally pretty well. So, you know, feel free to experiment a bit with this recipe. You know, don't feel afraid to, you know, sit in the background and just be passive. You know, don't be afraid to sort of experiment and be a bit mad. Apologies about the slight interruption there. Some green tea just fell out of my cupboard and just hit me in the face. So we'll just ignore that. And then one other ingredient, actually, I just quickly forgot, is a carton of passata. Usually I'd say about 400 to 500 grams. It doesn't have to be the highest quality, but if it is slightly higher than standard quality, then that's always welcome. And then, like I said, the only really other major ingredient we've got to add in is the garlic. But again, that one is pretty much entirely optional. So we'll get on to the preparation of these ingredients and just the general guidelines of how to make it. And really all you need to make this recipe is a wooden spoon, a vegetable knife, as you can see here, a large cutting knife for slightly larger ingredients such as the onions and peppers, whereas we'll probably use the vegetable knife really just for cutting up the herbs and the chilies. And then a cutting board, of course, as well. And then move over here and you'll need a nice reasonably sized pot like this. This one is cast iron, but even if you just have stainless steel, that'll work just fine. So we'll get on to the preparation and see how this thing turns out. Okay, so first thing I'll do to show you guys how to prepare is to start off with the onion. Now this is one part of the process that isn't really that hard to create, or do rather. Cutting an onion, I think, is one of the most kind of one of the most overhyped in terms of difficulty kind of things to do in cooking, really. And you don't really have to worry about it too much. Sorry about the slight blast of music there, and also in the introduction where I was telling you guys about the ingredients. That was just my housemate who was just passing by, going to the toilet. So first thing you'll need to do with the onion is to cut off this slightly hairy bit at the end. By no means, and I mean by no means, should you cut off the root, and I'll explain why in a minute. So first you just cut off the little slightly hairy bit here at the end, and just use that to peel it off. If it takes off a little bit of the flesh of the onion, don't worry about it too much, just so long as you keep most of the outer layers on. and just so long as you remove the majority, if not all, of the brown sort of skin on the outside. People sometimes freak out about peeling an onion. I don't really understand why myself. It's not really that hard to do. I mean, the thing is, when I first started cooking when I was about 16, I did have a bit of trepidation about cutting onions, because that was when I was, very unused to the art of cooking, and I hadn't really cooked onions or, cut them up before. And I remember there was a couple of times when my mum would make coleslaw in the food processor, and my eyes would really water, because we always used to get our onions from the farmer's market in Blackheath, and they would be brutally strong, those onions. They were very good quality, but they were very strong, so when you cut them up, they really made your eyes water, even if you're a veteran of cooking. So, as you can see, I've peeled the onion here, cut off the slightly hairy bit around here. Now, the reason why I'm going to keep the root part of the onion intact is because when I cut it in half, and then sort of course, dice it up from there, keeping the root intact will allow you to grip onto the onion slightly easier and allow for a little bit more stability. So we'll just get onto that. Just cut it in half, don't cut off the root, and then what I basically do is I just cut up just right up to the, if you can see here, right up to the root bit of the onion. Don't cut straight past it, otherwise you will sacrifice a lot of stability. Now, you will miss out on a little bit of onion flesh in doing this, and that is a bit of an annoyance, I will admit, but this is much more of a safer way of doing the cutting up of the onion. If you do sort of decide to cut off the root, you are probably going to save a little bit more onion, but it's really, for me, not worth it compared to the amount of safety that you'll then gain from having a lot more stability and grip on the onion as you dice it up. And I just don't think it's really worth risking your fingers and fingernails just cutting it conventionally. I mean, me myself, I've nipped my fingers, cut off bits of my fingernails before by cutting onions conventionally, so I'd always advise doing it like this, particularly when you're making bulk meals or you're a bit on the tight side of the timescale, so to speak. Always go for the more time efficient option. Okay, so now we've diced up the onions. What we're going to do now is just quickly turn on the hob with a bit of oil in it. And when you use the oil in this recipe, you're not going to need too much. I'd say probably just about 2 tablespoons. Probably about. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare the peppers. Now the peppers are a lot easier. They'll be a lot more, safer to the eyes, so to speak. They're a lot more mild, of course, and so you won't really have any trouble really preparing them for anyone, just so long as you're safe with your hands again and don't really cut yourself too badly. Now, as you can see, there are a lot of seeds in peppers. Basically what you do is, of course, when you cut them in half, you just rip out the core, chuck that away, and then you see any of this sort of whiter flesh in and around the insides of the pepper after you've cut it open. You just peel that out. It's not too hard to pull it out. And when you rinse out the peppers, be sure to make sure that you get rid of all of the seeds, because I have seen people eat them, but it's just like they're not very nice at all, really, to be honest. So I would not advise it, really, if I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. So I'll just show you that again. Just cut it in half up to the sort of core, just tear it in half, remove the core. Very easy, not too bad. Just keep your hands stable, don't bring your fingers too close to the knife, and you'll be all golden and tasty, just like these nice yellow peppers here. I would say get yellow peppers because they contrast more with the redness of a nice chili con carne, and it creates more of a sort of interesting look of colour. So just quickly rinse the peppers in some cold water. No need to give them a real scrub with your fingers, just give them a quick rinse in the cold water. And then very simply, you just take the red peppers, or yellow peppers, I would say rather. I mean, red peppers are probably the second best really to use in this recipe, but I prefer to use yellow because they just create more of a colour sort of clash, in a good way, not in a bad way at all really. So of course you can see I've sliced it up into strips, then I just cut those strips in half. That's it. And you just do that for the other 3/4 of the pepper you have. I think I'll probably will put this in the intro, but this recipe kind of tends to serve 3 to 4 dinner-like servings, really. So either you can make this for yourself and it will last you for like 3 or 4 nights, or you can make this for a dinner party of like 3 or 4 people, and then of course you just multiply the ingredient amounts from there in order to, you know, get it properly appropriated to how many people there will be at your gathering, or how many nights you'll need to last on this meal. What's quite good about chili con carne as well is you can make it in bulk quite easily, and it'll last you for a long time, because I mean, it doesn't keep for an exceptionally long amount of time, but you can make it in big bulk amounts and it will really go far. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put the yellow peppers to one side, and we're just going to put the onion into the pot to sort of fry it in a bit of oil, and we're also going to put a tiny dash of salt in there, not too much, but I'd say probably just like just like 2 pinches at the absolute most, really not that much at all. So we'll just go and do that now. And then you just give it a quick stir with your wooden spoon. Oh, I'll tell you what, something actually, if there's one smell I feel is quite underrated in the world of culinary sort of cuisine and cooking and artistry, it's the smell of frying onions in a little bit of salt. It just smells beautiful. Okay, so next up, of course, we're going to prepare the chilies. The chilies are a little bit more delicate to prepare, not because there's a higher chance of you cutting your fingers, because like I said, I'd probably recommend using the red knife. You know, the smaller herb knife is really much more of the thing you want to use for a chili pepper like this. I mean, you can use a vegetable knife like the big green one there, but at the same time, it's just kind of really just as practical, and it's more appropriate really, considering the smaller size of the chili peppers is more appropriate to using something a bit more precise and smaller on them. So you just cut them lengthways after you've cut off the tops, as you can see here. And then after that, we'll get a small teaspoon or a spoon of some variation. As you can see, we've got a nice spoon here. Just give it a quick wipe. And then what you do with a chili pepper like this is you get the point of the spoon in towards the core of the chili, and then you just basically just rake out the guts of the chili, because otherwise it may be a bit unbearably hot for you. These aren't particularly hot chilies, but particularly if you're using something like, say, ghost chilies or Scotch bonnets, you'll really want to use this method, because the white sort of core of the chili peppers really doesn't taste that nice, and the seeds can sometimes be brutally spicy. So I personally would stick well clear of ingesting these if you are not particularly of the spicy taste of mind. So now you can see we've de-seeded them, and again, just like with the peppers, just give them a quick rinse in some water, and you basically just prepare them kind of like the peppers as well. You just cut them into halves or into quarters, and then just dice them up from there. Just remove the rest of these chili pepper seeds. And I'll just give you a quick demonstration of how to just quickly chop up these chili peppers. Sorry, just move that board slightly more into focus. As you can see, just this. And you can do it like that, or you can cut it lengthways and then chop it up, which will probably be slightly easier. Okay, so as you can see now, the chili peppers have been nicely diced up, and after about 5 minutes of the onions just simmering in a bit of salt and pepper at a very low heat, I put in the yellow peppers just to sort of give them a bit of time to wilt, while also putting on the lid onto the pot. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly prepare the rest of the seasonings. You don't really need too much parsley or coriander. I'd say parsley is probably a bit more important to this recipe than the coriander. If you can miss out the coriander, don't worry about it too much. It's not essential. The parsley is a bit more appropriate to this kind of recipe, I'd say, and so I'd definitely recommend getting a bag of this because it will really help this recipe go a long way. You don't really need to put the these herbs in at a specific time, just so long as it's at least a little bit before serving or finishing the recipe, because otherwise they won't really have time to blend all their flavours into the rest of the sort of the mix, so to speak. So what I'm doing now is I'm just cutting off the majority of the stems of the parsley and coriander. And again, like with the peppers and the chili peppers, just grab that shit up and just quickly give it just a short rinse in some cold water. Nice and tasty, I mean, the thing is, usually when I get like my herbs or vegetables from places like Sainsbury's or Waitrose, they're not really too unclean, because I mean, you know, most supermarkets are owned by, you know, big corporations that don't really want to sort of do a bad way of their customers, so they, you know, they of course make health and safety their primary concern in a lot of cases. So you know, I suppose you could say, wait, what, you know, which is more important really? Is it sort of health and safety, or is it more the genuine article of a properly fresh piece of vegetable or seasoning? Oh, that smell of fresh parsley just chopped up. It's beautiful stuff. Now, we're not going to be adding this in right away. Instead, what we're going to be adding in next is the red kidney beans. Now, what you're going to do with these things first is you're not going to just add them straight into the mix. Instead, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be draining the red kidney beans instead. Okay, so now, as you can see, I've got a nice little sieve or colander, so to speak, in the sink. What I'm just going to do now is I'm just going to put both tins of kidney beans into the colander. I don't use kidney beans much often myself, except for when I'm doing things like the odd bit of curry, a nice soup, or chili con carne. Chili con carne is probably what I use kidney beans the most in. Now, I put them in there, and that's basically just to sort of let all the gunk sort of residue wash away. But what we're going to do before we quickly put these into the mix is we're just going to give them a nice quick rinse of water. And these are really good because kidney beans are kind of a very underrated superfood in my eyes. They've got a bit of protein, a lot of fibre in them, very good for your diet, very nice stuff. Really nice in something like a chili con carne or a soup or a stew, and really good with things like brown rice. So definitely keep an eye out for these in your local supermarket. Okay, so now it's probably the easiest part of the recipe really. It's just putting in the rest of the ingredients. I put in the kidney beans first instead of the mincemeat because I just think it's a good idea to get them a bit heated up and allow them to bulk up the recipe before we put in the main part of the recipe. So you just get a knife, just pierce the plastic lid of the mince, and usually with these kind of sort of packages of mincemeat, you'll usually have this bit of paper underneath just to protect the hygiene of the mincemeat inside. Just peel that from underneath and chuck it away. Now the amount of mincemeat I'd usually recommend is about 500 grams. That's the amount this meat is here, and it's really not that much. It's perfectly fine enough for a recipe of about 3 to 4 servings, and even if you make it go far enough, I think you can even make it go to 5 servings. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sort of just chuck this into the pot and just give it a little stir. This is probably slightly one of the more arduous parts of the recipe, if I'm honest, but it's not too hard really. I mean, all you're doing now is just chucking a bit of mincemeat into some nice kidney beans and peppers. Now all you have to do really is just break up the mincemeat as best you can and try and mix it in with as much of the kidney beans, onions and peppers as you possibly can. And this might seem like it's a bit gross at first, but it's well worth it just to break it up. That way, you know, it'll take less time to sort of cook, and you'll get more of the juices swirling around inside, so you'll get a lot more flavour out of the mincemeat. So I'm going to try and get as much of this meat to the bottom of the pan as I can. See now all those nice colours, the pink and brown of the meat, along with the dark purple of the kidney beans and the yellow of the peppers, nice and mixing together. So I'll just turn the heat up slightly and add in a little bit more oil as well, just to be safe. Then, of course, the next thing to do is to prepare the rest of the ingredients that are going to go into this thing. So next up we'll need the passata, which we'll just need to start simmering as soon as possible really, and in order to kind of poach the meat a little bit, I suppose. The meat should be mostly browned before you put in the rest of these ingredients. However, it is nice to sort of poach it a little bit in the flavours of the passata and the tin tomatoes, which is why I said, like, it's, you know, it's not imperative like with, say, the meat or the vegetables that you get the top quality ingredients in regards to the passata and the tin tomatoes, but it helps a lot if you do. So basically what I did is I just cut open the carton of passata a bit messily. You might want to do it a bit more safely than I just did here. Basically what it's going to do now, it's just going to pour it in there, nice and lovely, and we just give it a nice little stir around. And what I like to do is sometimes I like to cook the meat entirely before I add in the ingredients, so it can be a bit of a quicker cooking recipe. But since I've got a bit more time here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just cook the mince a little bit and then chuck in the passata and tin tomatoes now. So the meat has a bit more time to poach and soak up a bit more of the flavours of the tin tomatoes and passata. This does mean that the recipe will take slightly longer, however, in my eyes, that's a sacrifice worth making, really. So, and just prepare tin tomatoes. I'd say a good brand is the one I've got here, Cirio. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a nice Italian brand, actually. You can find it in most Sainsbury's in the UK. Very, very nice brand indeed. Just chuck that in there and just stir it around. Good stuff. The thing is, after you've added in the ingredients at this stage, you're probably going to want the recipe to simmer for like at least a couple of hours so the meat has time to cook. So you can give it time to sort of, you know, properly beef up, for lack of a better term, and become less raw, so to speak. Now with the tomato puree, you're not really going to need to add in too much. I'm just going to add in about 2 tablespoons full, should do. And this will just help thicken it up, give it a bit of oomph, and just add a little bit more brightness and colour to the whole thing. It's already pretty sort of bright and lively. As you can see, you've got a nice contrast of darkness from the meat and the kidney beans. Got a little bit of, you know, lightness from the peppers, and then you've got a lot of vibrance from all the red in here as well. So that's all good and tasty. As you can see, probably if you look close enough, the meat is starting to cook a bit more. It probably is a little bit safer really to put the meat in first before the kidney beans. That way it has more time to accurately cook according to how much you need it to cook. I know some types of mince do cook slightly quicker than others. I mean, when I've used lamb mince, it's generally cooked a little bit quicker than beef mince. But beef mince is really the kind of the meat that I would rather you guys use in this recipe, because it's just a bit more appropriate. So now we're going to put in the seasonings. And first off, we're just going to put in the sort of powdered sort of kind of seasonings, such as the curry powder and the chili peppers. I would preferably actually use the smoked paprika instead of the chili powder, but unfortunately I didn't have any, and unfortunately I don't have a massive amount of desiccated chili flakes either, but you don't need to add in too many because you've already got some raw chilies anyway. I mean, we did de-seed them a little bit, but you don't need too much. So as for the smoked paprika and or curry powder, you're only going to need about 2 teaspoons, and for the chili flakes you're only probably going to need 1 teaspoon, maybe 2 if you're feeling a bit adventurous. Just stir that in, gives it a nice little bit of aroma, makes it smell a bit nicer. Just stir that in, mix it around a bit, and then add in the last main ingredient, which of course is the chopped up fresh herbs, the Okay, so as you can see, I've put the coriander, the parsley and the chili peppers onto the mix. Now you just need to accurately make sure that you just stir them in without spilling too much of it outside. Now you can see the pot is starting to get a bit full, so try not to get too many of the herbs and vegetables, otherwise you will overflow things a little bit. That's why I got 2 kidney bean tins instead of 3, and I only got about half a kilo of beef mince instead of about 600 or 720. I'd say that's probably a good amount, really, to be honest. You don't need much more than half a kilo of mince. I mean, you could probably even feed like about 5 people or make 5 portions of this with just 500 grams of beef mince if you're careful with how you make it. So now, as you can see that I've added in the chili peppers and the parsley and coriander, we've got a nice vibrantly colourful meal there. Basically now what I'm going to do, now that I've added pretty much everything in there, I'm probably just going to add in a tiny bit more salt, just to give it a bit more zing. Not too much. Half a tablespoon of salt should go into this recipe at the utmost. If a little bit more goes in like it did there, don't worry about it. I mean, salt can be quite unhealthy if you do put too much of it in, and that is an understatement that I think needs more saying, really. So don't be too liberal with it, but don't be too conservative on the other side either. So there you go, nice little bit of colourful chili con carne, and we'll see how it turns out when it's finished cooking. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to turn the heat down about as low as we can without turning the heat off, and just move it closer to the centre of the fire, and then we'll just leave it for about an hour to 2 hours at the most, just to simmer very slowly, get all those flavours just mixed in together and make sure the meat is absolutely cooked through. I mean, it's not like, say, a chicken stew or a roast chicken where you do have to keep a very significant eye on the meat itself, otherwise it will overcook, or, you know, if we're talking about beef, then a roast joint of beef. So, you know, you can be a bit more liberal with how you cook the meat here. All you have to really do now is just put the lid on, just leave it to simmer for about 1 to 2 hours, and then of course go and do a bit of washing up, and then when it's done I'll show you how to dish it up. Believe me, it's not that difficult.
And that is it. That's pretty much the entirety of the recipe. It's quite a long-winded one at times, but it's really quite straightforward. It's very healthy, not too expensive, and I can easily guarantee that it will last you for several nights if you're just making it in bulk for yourself. Serving suggestions, I would say, would be to serve the chili con carne on a bed of brown rice or couscous with a dollop of either yogurt or sour cream on top. As I said before, you can make this with either lamb or veggie mince and it will work just as well. So don't be afraid to experiment maybe a little bit with this recipe, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it as much as I do. In any case, I hope you've enjoyed this first episode of Cooking with Uncle Gitbag, or Uncle Ted, or whatever you may want to call me, and hopefully this will be the first of many episodes to come on this channel. Stay tuned for more, and I'll see you guys in the kitchen.